It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Stu Shostak. Hey, Stu, how are you?
I am great, Douglas. How are you, sir?
Doing fantastic. Thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
I've been dying to talk to you since I watched your film. I watched it maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, and the film is called Stu's Show, and it's a documentary, and it's basically about your life. And I hope this isn't a spoiler, but I got to tell you, it really took me on the roller coaster ride of emotion. And I suppose that was done deliberately, the way it was cut. But like everything was going along light and fluffy, and how you got to where you are and starting out and doing all the show warm-ups, and then bang, and you just get slammed with this thing. And then it has a happy ending. It resolves, and I was good about that. But I was exhausted after I watched it.
You're the first person to use that adjective after seeing the film. That was C.J. Wallace's intention, the director of the film. My big thing was when I saw the rough cut of it, which was right before the pandemic shut everything down, I thought there was too much of me at the beginning, because I agreed to do this film strictly on the fact that I want to show the general public that they can deal with the flawed healthcare system in this country if they become aggressive enough and in some cases mean enough to show that you mean business when it comes to getting your significant other well.
Right.
And my feeling was that we don't even see my soon-to-be wife until at least 30 or 35 minutes into the film. And then it does that 180, that pivot that you talk about.
Right.
And most people got it. You got it. Most of the people that have seen the film got it. There were a couple of people that thought the momentum dropped, surprisingly, when Janine comes into the film, because they were expecting 90 minutes of this quirky guy who's a TV historian and collects shows on film and tape and had the honor and pleasure of working for Lucille Ball and basically built up his career, from the time he was a teenager into, present day. I'm 65 now. And some people didn't get it. But like I said, I thought that there was too much of me, and CJ said, we have to do this, because the majority of the public does not know who you are. Only your little circle of followers that you've had on the internet for 16 years knows who you are. And if we don't establish the fact that you are who you are and that you had this, incredible relationship with Lucille Ball, who's kind of the catalyst for this whole thing, because Janine, as you know, is a major Lucy fan too. And we don't get them on your side, that, even though you're loud and you're obnoxious and you're abrasive, thank you very much, you're still kind of this likable guy. And if we don't establish that in the beginning, when the tables are turned and you're fighting to save Janine's life, they won't be rooting for you. And once he explained that to me and I understood that, I said, well, okay, because again, the only reason I wanted to do this was to, show people how to combat the healthcare system in this country and emerge victoriously. So I think he did it the right way, and most people got it. You got it, but do you see what I mean? I hope that answers your question, because now I've forgotten what your question was.
Well, it wasn't really a question, more than just an observation, but the fact that, it does take you on this sort of roller coaster ride of emotion. For me, I thought it was great because it made it interesting. Honestly, if it had been 90 minutes of just show warm-ups, it might have been a little bit too long.
Yeah, you could ask some of the people who have sat through 90 minutes of my warm-ups, and you'd get that same response. So I hear you.
But where it broke into that section, it took the film to a whole different place.
Right, that was his intention.
Yeah.
That's what he wanted.
Well, he did it right.
He wanted people to know me And then to see that even though I collect all this stuff and I'm kind of quirky and everything, when it comes to responsibility, I am a normal person. That's was his point.
Well, I guess I got to do the follow-up now. So how is Janine?
Well, everybody asks that because she hasn't done any interviews with anybody. She hasn't been requested, and I'm not sure why. She's not fully recovered. She never will be, but she's pretty good. She's a lot better recovered than she was at our wedding. But, people forget, and maybe you forgot this too, that she's interviewed throughout the first part of the documentary too, until we get to the part where she has the brain aneurysm. Right. And all of the stuff that she talks about on camera was done at the same time that I was interviewed for the documentary. But like you, and you're not alone, everybody else gets so engrossed in the story that they forget about all the things that she said prior. They forget when that was done, and her health becomes a main concern. But, she's mobile. She can drive if she wants, but she's afraid to. She's got all her marbles back. Her memory's better than mine. And she still cleans the house like crazy, and she cooks meals and everything. She will never be fully recovered because the damage was more extensive than the doctors thought that it was. I'd say she's about 90% back.
Well, that's great.
And we're 8 years from that this November, from that fateful day where she had the aneurysm. So,
so
better than the alternative, Douglas.
When's your wedding anniversary?
October 26th.
What year was that?
2014 is when we got married, but we were together since 2007 prior to that. So this will be 15 years together for us. One of the things that kept me going, usually when there's a medical crisis like this, the doctors sort of err on the side of pessimism. They don't want to get your hopes up. But after they repaired the brain aneurysm and they did MRIs and all of this stuff on her head, they said, she was really lucky because there's not a lot of extensive damage. They said that there was weakness on her right side, which was corrected with physical therapy. Her right side is as strong as her left side now. And there was some cognitive damage, but they said that they wouldn't be able to assess the cognitive damage until she came out of the coma, which was almost 6 weeks after it happened. And that was far more extensive than they thought it was. Even though it didn't show up physically, it messed up her eye. It messed up one of her vocal cords. To this day, one of her vocal cords is still paralyzed, and so she learned to talk again on one vocal cord. She's really the star of this film. She's the one that really worked hard to try to get her life back to as close as it was before. I just took the obstacles that were in her way and beat them down as best I could. But in any case, that's basically the story in a nutshell. She's about 90% back. She has some balance issues when she walks, and there's a couple of other minor things. Her eye is still messed up. We had 4 or 5 surgeries we still had to do on her after we got married. But we got married because I just got tired of having to call her relatives. Even though I was at her advance directive, some of the hospitals and stuff, that wasn't good enough. They needed an okay from a blood relative. So we got her well enough so that I could marry her, and then we had the rest of the surgeries, and we had not 1 ounce of trouble with the medical industry after we were married, because I was her husband at that point and not her boyfriend, and I made all the medical decisions, and there was no question. And that's how you learn to work the system. And that's what I'm trying to convey here to everybody who wants to see this film.
Well, I was really happy that once you got married that issue went away, because I also experienced that with a good friend of mine who is gay, who had the same issue with his partner. And they had
we
been
have
together.
A lot of gay friends,
yeah.
And when we started showing the film to them, they said, "Now you know what we go through all the time."
Right.
It's so unfair. It's just horrible.
So that, thank goodness, has been changed. Now the gay people can be married and have all the legal rights, but it didn't make any difference because you guys were a straight couple and it was still the same problem.
Absolutely, because we weren't married.
Because
and so as soon as she came out of the coma, I proposed to her. and she was still out of it. I think that's why she said yes. But hey, it's 15 years. We're still together here, and I love her, and I'm going to take care of her the rest of her life,
Well, that's
fantastic. Douglas, you just go into that mode. People are calling me a hero and telling me, I'm Superman for standing up to our terrible healthcare system. And let me just say this. There are a lot of wonderful doctors and nurses and therapists out there. There really are. They're the ones that got her well. It's just I had to cut through the crap and the bureaucracy and the red tape to get to them. But once I got to them, she wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for them. It's just it's the insurance companies mostly, and it's the bureaucracy of how the system works, and it's got to stop. It's got to be broken down. Michael Moore did a movie several years ago about our screwy healthcare system. It didn't do any good. I'm not sure our film is going to do any good, but maybe collectively, if enough people do this, maybe things will change. It's really, really flawed, and it needs no other country has the problems that we have, and no other country has a profit that the medical industry makes.
Yeah, well, it's a big problem in the United States, and it's compounded because we've got a big population, we've got big pharma, who is not going to let go of their profits without a fight, and then we've got a government that basically doesn't work at this point. And
Correct.
They're trying to... Now, I'm not saying I'm against socialized medicine. There has to be some kind of a balance because people need health care. I think it is a right for people. If you're low income, you should be able to have it.
Of course.
But when the government starts taking over anything, they screw it up. And so we've got a compound problem.
Yes, because the medical industry is already screwed up.
Right.
And so you're going to screw up the screw up.
Right.
That's what you're saying.
Right.
Yeah.
It's already screwed up. The government's going to come in and make it worse.
Yeah, but let's hope not. Let's hope not. I supported Bernie Sanders the first time he ran. I didn't support him this last time. And the problem is that Bernie wanted way too much, and he convinced a lot of people that if he got in there, it would change. And even if he did get in there, it wasn't going to change because we've got a divided country like you've never seen before. It's gotten worse.
Yeah.
And, again, I don't want to swing all this political, but, when healthcare is involved, you're talking about people's lives.
Exactly.
One of the things that I've been saying is the healthcare industry is a for-profit business like every other business in this country. They're there to make money, but you're dealing with people's lives when you're dealing with in the medical industry. So it's a little bit different. And it's not that the people that work there are immune, but there's a lot of people there that it's just a job to them. They see this day in and day out. They see the pain. They see the grief. They see the suffering. They see the cancer. And in Janine's case, a brain aneurysm or a stroke or something horrible. But it's a day-to-day thing with them. They're not immune, but they've been programmed to just deal with it. And you, as a health advocate or advisor, if you don't take an interest in your loved one, they certainly aren't. And like I said, I just went into that mode because I waited 51 years to find somebody who I was compatible with my whole life. I finally find somebody who loves me back the way I loved her. That was a big problem in my whole life when I was dating other women and stuff, is I would fall head over heels and they didn't feel the same way about me. Well, she did. So when this thing happened, it's like, okay, you finally find somebody, you've had almost 7 years with her, and now this is going to be taken away? F you, pal. That's not going to happen. This is not going to happen to me. And if the doctors hadn't given me false hope and said, no, she's going to make a full recovery based on the physical x-rays and stuff we see here, I'm not sure I would have fought as hard. I would have fought. But if they had said, well, there's a 50% chance she could end up a vegetable in a nursing home the rest of her life, I'm not sure I would have done that. So in this instance, their pessimism made me fight harder, or their optimism rather, not their pessimism. Their optimism made me fight harder to get her well. They were wrong, but hey, she's here today and she's fully functional. She's just not 100%. So, you just go into that mode and you'll learn a lot. I didn't know about social workers or case managers or any of these people that are supposed to quote unquote help you, but they're all in cahoots with these rehab places, and the insurance companies always overbill. Yeah. They always charge 8 to 10 times more than what they collect. And I'm thinking, why? because they can use it as a tax write-off, and then they don't pay taxes. Well, this hospital only gave us such amount of money, and this nursing facility only kicked back this much, even though we billed them. You see how it works? It's like any other business. It's a racket. And I just wish that there was more of an investigation on this, because when I got into this hot and heavy with her, I was more angry than I was determined to get her well with the BS that I had to put up with. You don't see a lot of that in the film because C.J. Wallace just wanted to tell the story. He did a great job of telling the story, and he did get the point across that our healthcare system is very flawed, and that's all we wanted to do. That's all we want, and I want to show people that if they become, it's now the new term now, Douglas, is not going postal, it's going stew. That's what we're calling it now.
Well, that's great. Well, I'm glad she's doing well. And,
she's fine. She's good.
And we're actually doing your movie in reverse, because we started with Janine, and now I want to shift this over to your career.
Sure.
So one thing I was curious about, there was a film clip of you out on the street handing out tickets. I forget which show it was. But how old were you at that point? It was like the very first clip.
Early on in the film, I worked at Metro Media, and every December it got really hard to fill those studios because people were doing Christmas shopping and the weather got cold and nobody was going out. And, producers get angry if you don't have every seat filled in those bleachers. So the local news in Los Angeles did a story about this. They overheard me bitching and whining somewhere, maybe in the commissary at the studio, and there was a news reporter there and said, this is fascinating. We really didn't know how this works. We'll do a story on you, and maybe we'll get you some people to fill those seats. So that was in 1979 or 78. So I was either 22 or 23 when that feature on our guest relations department was done. But I actually started when I was 17, almost 18 years old in that job. I got a break right after I got out of high school. So, and I did that for almost 7 years until I got my warm-up break.
Well, I guess it begs the question, did you have any aspirations to be an actor or do something, or did you just do this and then it just turned into what it was? I mean, did you have another path for your life in mind?
When I wanted to get into the business, I didn't care what I did. Entry level is either the mailroom or being a page. And I probably would have become a page had I not been offered the job as an assistant ticket hawker. I wanted to act for a long time. As a kid, I watched shows with kids in it, Lost in Space. I liked Billy Mooney. I watched Hazel. I watched all of these shows when I was a kid in the 60s. And I thought, well, this would be cool. I'd love to, maybe act. And as I got older, I kind of liked the writing aspect of it. When Norman Lear moved his shows over to Metro Media from CBS, I was booking audiences for game shows, and now all of a sudden I'm giving away tickets for All in the Family and Maude and Good Times and the Jeffersons, and this was a whole different class of people coming in there, and a lot more prestigious and just like I said, a lot more classy. And I got to know some of the producers and writers just from hanging out there, and I thought, well, maybe I'll be a writer, But then I saw Norman Lear do warm-ups. And I saw Johnny Olson do warm-ups at the game shows, and I said, this is like really cool. Just stand there in front of the audience, be yourself, talk to them, be the link between them and the show. And I just thought that's a really cool job. And I found out it paid really well. So that was my ambition, was to become a warm-up guy.
Okay, that was my next question, actually. So you did get paid for that. That wasn't an intern type job.
Oh, no. It's an after-SAG job. When you pick up a microphone and you're talking to a group of people in a studio, that is a union job.
Oh,
and
great.
So there are SAG and AFTRA minimums for that. And it was really good pay. I got the same amount of pay for one warm-up that I got for doing a week's worth of ticket hawking.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
so now you know why, writers and producers and actors are paid far more than that. But for 4 hours work, and actually in those days it was 2 hours work, to make the same thing in 2 hours that it took me 40 hours to do during the week. That's why everybody wants show business, Douglas. That's it right there.
Is it still done like that? I mean, do they still have the big studios for the shows on the networks?
They do, but it's changed so much since when I got my hair started turning gray, I was kind of aged out of this, and the producers I worked for were aged out of producing and writing their shows. It's changed a lot. When I started doing audience warm-ups, we're talking about a 23-minute show or 24-minute show without commercials. And unless there was a major costume change or a set change, we were done in no more than an hour. If it took an hour and a half, that was rare. But what happened as these audience shows went on and on throughout the years, and this started in the 90s, the studios that produced these shows started to take a more active interest in the shows themselves, and they started to micromanage the writers. So if a show was produced by Universal, the Universal executives would start coming onto the set, and if they didn't like the way an actor did a line or they didn't like the audience response, they would request the writers rewrite the show on the spot there in front of everybody. And then on top of that, whatever network it aired on, ABC, CBS, or NBC, then they had a say, and they started hanging out there. And so what happened was you had all of these executives worried about their jobs, all giving the producers input. So we would normally do one pass. In the early days that I did warm-up, we would run the show through one time, but we'd do two performances. We'd do a taping in the afternoon and a taping in the evening, and whichever taping worked out better would be the master they would use to go on the air, but they would use the best parts of both shows. Once everything started to get micromanaged and everybody had a say, we'd start doing scenes 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. And it got to the point around the turn of this century, sounds weird, but that's when it happened. I would go out at 6:45 to start the show, and I would very rarely say goodnight to people before midnight. Wow. That's ridiculous for a 22, 23-minute show to take that amount of time. And the one example I always like to give is Friends. Friends was an extremely popular show on NBC for years and years and years. That show was so micromanaged, they had an audience for Act 1 and an audience for Act 2 because nobody would sit for 8 hours while they shot this 22-minute show.
It's like going to an opera. Yeah,
can you believe that? But that's how television is done today. Their spontaneity is all gone. These taping sessions take forever. People get fidgety. I was really good toward the end. I learned how to bribe an audience and to keep them in their seats, and I'd give them Milky Way bars half the way through to get their energy level up and stuff. But even toward the end, it was ridiculous doing these scenes 5, 6, 7 times. Everybody was just fit to be tight. It just became no fun anymore to go to one of these things. And now, from what I understand, they're paying people to sit in those seats so they don't leave. And that way they've got a guaranteed audience for however long it takes. That to me is disgusting. But, you know, such is life. I'm an old man on a park bench in Santa Monica whining about the good old days, Douglas.
Well, so somewhere in all of this, you met Lucille Ball, and I remember the story about how you actually cut videotape. I was laughing because I've done that. And it's no fun, and it doesn't look that great. The transitions are bad. But apparently you did something like that, and it got to Lucy. Why don't you tell that story? It's really fun.
Okay, I major Lucy fan since I was a kid. And you're talking about the documentary I was working on for another class at the time that I took her class. I almost didn't take her class because, again, working in the business, I met the director of One Day at a Time. I happened to have directed a bunch of Here's Lucy's in the early 70s and didn't like working with her because she's one of these, old school vets like Milton Berle and Bob Hope and Sid Caesar that, wants to be in charge of her set. And once you understand that, you can follow along. It's perfectly professional, perfectly legit. But this director was kind of a persnickety guy who wanted to have control of everything. And that's not the case when you work with Lucille Ball. So he had a bad taste in his mouth. And come to find out after I told this story, some people told me that in the 90s after Lucy died, he went on some of the talk shows and badmouthed her to the talk show hosts. And again, he had to have his thing his way, and he did on every show except when he worked for her. So I'm stretching this out. I didn't have any decent video equipment in those days, and I was taking another class at the time in TV directing. And I decided, since I was a big Lucy fan, that I was going to do a documentary on I Love Lucy. And in cutting the clips together, because I didn't have the studio equipment in those days, I had 2 Betamaxes. And so when I needed to make an edit, I'd put the record one in pause. And then when I found the part that I wanted to play from the other Betamax, I'd release that pause. And in those days, there were the flying video heads did not sync up. And so there's like a big field of snow between each edit. Once in a while, you'd get lucky and you'd get one that wasn't so bad. And I was taking this class that she was teaching. My counselor had talked me out of what the director at One Day at a Time and said, take the class, judge for yourself how she is. Best advice anybody gave me. And I got up enough nerve to give her the tape. And I said, I'm working on this on another class, for another class. Would you take a look at this? It's a documentary on your first series. And she took an instant liking to me from the first of the class because I made myself known and everything. And, several weeks into it, I got up enough nerve. She took the tape home. And I figured that's all I was going to, I wasn't going to hear. And a couple of my friends said, how could you give her a tape with all those horrible splices and stuff in it? So unprofessional. Anyway, Gary Morton, her husband, called me the next day and says, this is fabulous. This is great. I didn't say anything about the bad splices or anything, but they looked beyond that and just looked at the work, at the content itself and not the way it was assembled. I guess he knew that with home equipment at the time, that's all you could do. And that eventually led to me going to work for her a couple of years later when there was an opening at her company. So again, right place, right time, having a little bit of talent and a little bit of nerve to push yourself. That's how it was done in those days. So I got very, very lucky, very lucky.
So you were her personal film archivist. So what exactly did you do? Tell me about that job.
Well, Howard McClay was her publicist, her longtime publicist for years and years and years. He was with her during the Desi years, and he passed away. And I kept in contact with both Lucy and Gary during those couple of years after the class. When she did the Tonight Show or Merv Griffin, I went down there and just made sure she knew I was there. And they had a deal with NBC that went south, unfortunately. Had they had that farmed out, I would have been able to get a job full-time with them. But I kept in touch with them. And one of Howard's job, besides publicizing her appearances and stuff, was to take charge of the film vault. And they never bothered to know what was in there because Howard had been with them so long. Whenever they needed a clip or a copy of a show, they would just say, get the I Love Lucy where she and Ethel wear the same dress. And he went down there and pulled it, and that was that. Well, once he was gone and they looked at the computer printouts of this stuff, they didn't know what was what. And, Entertainment Tonight and places like that were calling there all the time when they wanted a clip from something. And Gary remembered me from the class and said, this kid knows all of the shows and backwards and forwards, and he would be an asset to us for this particular function. So he called me into his office and basically offered me this job and said, the first thing you have to do is go in there and, we can't make heads or tails of this computer printout. We need this written in English for us. And for me, I was a kid in a candy store because here I am, all of Lucy's personal films, all original broadcasts from all of her series as they aired on the networks, camera negatives, specials that she did, appearances on other shows. And, some of the stuff I had to take home and look at because I wasn't sure from the leader what it was. And so, being an archivist and a historian, this was a dream come true for me. And it took about 6 months, but I made them a big notebook of stuff that was clear to read and whatever, and they just left me in charge of that. They said, well, you did all this work. Anytime anybody needs a clip, we'll just have them call you directly. You work for us. You pull the clip. You charge them for whatever time it takes for you to go pick it up and transfer it and return it. And that's what I did for them until the day she died. So again, just being in the right place at the right time and having a little bit of talent. That's what it took.
So these were all the films, God, there must have been thousands.
Yeah. There were, because there was 180 I Love Lucy's plus the 13 one-hour shows. There was 156 Lucy shows, 144 Here's Lucy's, and they had all the camera negatives from Here's Lucy from all 3 cameras, and that all had to be recatalogued, and that's what I did.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, did you ever meet Desi?
Yes, once. He was on Merv Griffin. Even though they were divorced, they still remained close. But he lived down in Del Mar in the San Diego area, and he was pretty much retired. But I'd gotten wind that he was doing the Merv Griffin show. And so I had a friend who worked on the show, and I got clearance to go backstage, and I went to his dressing room, and I was nervous. I mean, this guy is, pioneer of television, helped to create the 3-camera film technique, and I'd already worked for Lucy 5 or 6 years at this point. Knocked on his dressing room, and there he is, with his white Cuban hair and his accent, and he says, yes. And I introduced myself to him, and I said, we were sending him copies of some of the stuff I was transferring because Lucy wanted him to have copies of some of the stuff. I got access to all their old home movies. He let her keep those in the divorce settlement. So I was transferring all those, and we were sending them down to him. And I said, I'm the one that's, working as a film archivist for Lucy and Gary. And he says, Gary who? He was joking.
Funny.
But once he said that, it broke the ice. And I only got to spend about 15 minutes with him. But, man, if I could have had half a day with him, I would have been in heaven just learning about how that whole empire got built and how they developed the way the show was shot and everything. It was just amazing to me. But that was my one brief moment with him, but I cherished it. And he was great. I met his new wife, Edie. She was there. She seemed really nice. And that was it. Boy, would I have loved to have spent more time with him, though.
Oh yeah, he was a genius, a business genius, and I mean, when you think about, I've watched Lucy's over and over and over again, like most people, and the one thing that it's still funny. Obviously, it still can make you belly laugh because the comedy was flawless. It was brilliant and
timeless.
And timeless. But one thing that's interesting about it is that there aren't very many shows at all that had a full show, a full script, a full story, and yet they had also a full production of music and dancing and sometimes little skits like vaudeville plays and things like that, all thrown into a 30-minute show.
Amazing, isn't it? And they did it all live.
And they did it all live with a full orchestra. Unbelievable. And, I can't think of too many shows where the main actors, the stars, would sing and dance as well as do acting, comedy. I mean, Dick Van Dyke Show did a little of that, but not nearly to the scale that Lucy did.
Yeah, well, and by the time Dick Van Dyke Show came around, they would pre-record the music tracks the day before and play back. They would sing to them live, but they'd have it all mixed. And they'd play it back for their timing purposes and all that stuff. In I Love Lucy, since it was all brand new, this 3-camera filming technique in front of an audience, and Lucy insisted that the audience, she was always really good to the audiences that came to the show. And she was like that during the 80s on the show that I worked on with her. She treated the audience like they were all personal friends. There was no phoniness. There was no hiding anything from them. And they did everything live in front of them. And that's the way the studio was set up. They didn't have the facilities to pre-record the music back then. So when you see Fred and Ethel do an old vaudeville number at Ricky's Club, that was sung live. The orchestra was off to the side. It was all sound mixed properly, but the audience in the studio there on the stage saw and heard it as it was being filmed. And you're right. It's an era that we will never get back. NBC has tried to do that with these 2-hour things they do around Christmas time, Peter Pan and all of this stuff. But you can tell a lot of that stuff is pre-recorded, and they even say portions of the preceding were pre-recorded. The days of the 50s, you got to remember, too, it wasn't just Lucy. The actual live stuff out of New York, Douglas, like Milton Berle and Sid Caesar and Martha Raye and all of those shows, it's the same thing. It was all done live, mistakes and all. At least with Lucy, if there was a problem, they were shooting it on film. They would go back and do stuff again, but they hardly ever did pickups in those days. They would do what were called inserts, and you can notice those in a lot of the early I Love Lucys where they were just kind of finding their way. Every once in a while, there'd be a close-up of one of the actors that you could tell was shot later and put in. But for whatever reason, maybe to make it more intimate on those little TV screens that everybody had in those days, for all intents and purposes, that was a director's choice after everything was shot and captured the way that it was going to air. Some directors would say, like, oh, well, let's just do a close-up here so I can put a couple of close-ups in. It wasn't because they made a mistake. It was just to give the viewers at home a little more variety in the way it was, the way it came out, the way it looked. Well, but yeah, I mean, Those days are gone.
Yeah,
We're never going to have those days again.
Well, variety is the word du jour for this, because it was a variety show and a situation comedy all fused together. Even
Correct.
by the mid-'60s, it split up. You had variety shows like Dean Martin and Carol Burnett. Okay. But, well, she was 70s, right? Carol Burnett.
Late 60s.
Late
She
60s,
went on
okay.
in 67. So we can
Smothers
count
Brothers is another one that I was thinking of.
Smothers Brothers, yeah.
Right,
And
but
Sonny
they
Cher.
Right, but they didn't do a full situation comedy. They had little skits, they had little sketches, little 2-minute things.
Right.
But Lucy did both, and that's so unique for that show.
Yeah, the variety was weaved into the plot of the show. And, the basic premise was here's this wacky housewife who wants to get into, it's about, Ricky Ricardo, who is a nightclub performer who loves his work, and his wacky, zany wife who supposedly has no talent but loves that work more and wants to get into the show all the time. That was, if you want to sum up the premise of the show, that's what it was.
That's what it was.
And then the writers took it from there and made it broad and made it the great legendary classic that it is. But that's the skeleton of it right there.
Have you seen Being the Ricardos?
Yes.
What'd you think?
I thought it was a piece of trash.
Okay.
And I thought Aaron Sorkin was the most unqualified person to do a story like that. I call that West Wing Desilu style. Everybody looked like the 50s, but they talked like the 90s. And blatant things like we're taping a show on Friday when it's 1953 and there was no videotape. And calling the executive producer a showrunner, those are 90s terms.
Oh,
now, that's not going to bother the average viewer, but the whole thing was a pack of lies. He twisted the truth around so much, for his own narcissistic ego purposes, and you can tell he's a misogynist by the way he portrayed Madeline Davis. Madeline Davis was the sweetest, kindest, shyest woman. I used to kid her all the time. How could somebody so quiet and so refined write these hilarious slapstick shows? She was so quiet and no ego. And Sorkin portrayed her as a crazy person, insulting Bob Carroll all the time. The two of them were simpatico. They shared the credit and they shared the blame. When there was something that didn't work right, they were the first to say, it's our fault, we'll fix it. And you saw none of that in this. And the whole thing of her, snuggling up to Frawley and going out and drinking, that never happened. When Frawley wasn't on the set, he was in his dressing room playing the ponies, or he was drinking with Desi somewhere. But never with her. And Nicole Kidman comes off as this cold-hearted, self-centered, egotistical woman. And as you saw the Lucy in our film, the way she treated me, totally the opposite. And that's the way she was to me the whole 10 years I knew her. And that's the way she treated everyone around her. Yes, she was tough at work because it was her butt on the line. But as long as you did what she said, whether you thought it was right or wrong, you'd get along famously with her. She was very motherly and a heart of gold. And, the sweater incident in the film where she wouldn't let me leave the set because it was cold outside and I didn't have a sweater.
Yeah,
and she made
that.
wardrobe go get me a sweater. That was the first time I was ever on a set with her. That was in 1979 at Lucy Moves to NBC. When I went to work for her 2 years later, every year on my birthday, I got a sweater, a different color sweater, to remind me to always take a jacket out when it's cold, or a sweater. That's how she was. Now, is that what you saw through Nicole Kidman? No. And I don't blame the actors because they were just doing what Aaron Sorkin told them to do. It's funny, when the film came out and the Lucy fans around the world were just, shattering him and tearing him to shreds, and deservedly so, he was trying to walk it back saying, well, I wasn't doing a documentary. Well, you know what? You were, because when you take two beloved characters like that in the world is not stupid. The Lucy fans know the real story. They've read the books. They've seen Lucy and Desi on the air talk about their lives. And you twist it around like that to satisfy your own ego, you get what you deserve, pal. You got exactly what you deserve. And I think Aaron Sorkin is a brilliant writer, and I loved The Newsroom, the show he did on HBO, and I loved The Social Network and some of the things he did. But when I heard he was in charge of this, and he went right on record saying he never thought I Love Lucy was a funny show, What the hell is he doing writing and directing a biopic about their lives that's all of a sudden not a documentary?
He said I Love Lucy was not a funny show.
Yep.
Oh, well, that's,
and here he is.
That's enough for me. That's enough for me not to take him serious.
I didn't see the Academy Awards this year, but Amy Poehler made a remark such as the effect of, and of course Aaron Sorkin, who took a classic hilarious comedy like I Love Lucy and made a movie about it with not one laugh in it. Well, or something to that effect. She said something that was better than that, but what she said was exactly right.
The only part. The only part that I thought was funny was the table read with when he was talking about Rusty Hamer. That little sequence there I thought was funny.
Yeah, but again, this was 1952 when the episode was occurring, and only somebody like me would put this down. Make Room for Daddy didn't premiere until 1953.
Oh, so they even got all the timeline wrong.
Yeah, but for half the Madeline, there's one part of that table read where Madeline turns to Bob and says, "That's the funniest thing you've said in a month." She would never have talked that way to Bob. They were simpatico. They respected each other. And when I was squirming when I watched this thing. I couldn't stand it. Thank God Amy Poehler's documentary came out after that. I don't know if you saw that.
I haven't seen that one yet.
Douglas, you need to see that because there's nothing in it that I didn't know. But the way it was done with the audio tapes of both Lucy and Desi when they were narrating, and discussing their books, they were dictating the chapters of each of their respective books into the tape recorders. They used that for them to tell their own story. It was brilliant, and it was the truth. And the nice thing about the pandemic, the only nice thing, our film was supposed to come out before the pandemic. The pandemic delayed it. And it's now out after these other two films. Our film is a really nice button on the Amy Poehler documentary because she doesn't spend a lot of time on Lucy and Desi's years after the divorce, particularly her last 10 years with the failed sitcom and all that. And so the segment that's done, that C.J. Wallace put together on my relationship with Lucy, puts a really nice button on what Amy Poehler did. And I recommend highly that you and anybody else listening to us right now see that film. It'll wash the bad taste of the Sorkin film right out of your mouth.
I'm going to check it out. I was going to ask you if you'd ever met the kids, Lucy and Desi Jr.
Oh, sure.
Yeah?
Oh, sure. Yeah. In fact, I had to teach Lucy Arnaz how to read all of the stuff that I did. When Lucy died, the Lucille Ball production sort of got closed up shop. And Lucy Arnaz took over everything. And again, it's just like a network regime. When network changes personnel, they like to bring their own people in. So Wanda Clark, who was Lucy's longtime secretary, and Tom Watson, who became her publicist, and me, we were kind of dismissed. But I had to show Lucy how to read all of that stuff and how to figure out all that. And as far as I know, she's still in charge of those archives. And for a long time, I was her editor. I actually edited her demo reels for her nightclub act back in the 90s.
Oh, wow.
And so we had a really good relationship there for a while, but we've been pretty much out of touch for the last 25 years. And Desi Jr. is a great guy. I worked on his VCR. Whenever a tape got chewed up in his VCR, I was the one that opened it up and took it out for him.
Oh, aren't you sweet?
Yeah. He's one of these guys who tape Jeopardy every night, and he called me once and said, I'm not going to be home, and I got to tape Jeopardy, and the tape is jammed. So I'd go over to his house and take the cover off and take the tape off and give him a fresh tape and all that. He was great. I really enjoyed his company.
Did you set the clock for him too? On the VCR?
Yeah. Most of my clients, when I go in those days, I'd go in there and it's 12 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 12 o'clock on all of their VCRs. And I'd set them until the next power outage, and then I'd have to come back and do it again. So
nobody could figure out how to set the clock. That was the joke.
Well, you had to if you wanted to tape stuff. He knew that, but like you said, once the clock was set, he could set the timer, but he didn't know how to set the clock to real time. None of them did. It's funny. It's just really, really funny. But me being a tech guy, I guess it's just second nature to me.
So I wanted to bring this up, and again, it's kind of going on a downer, but I saw on your Facebook, and your very good friend Tony Dow, he was recently diagnosed with cancer. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's sad.
Yeah. What did you want to know about him?
Oh, just, how's he doing, and, what's the prognosis?
Well, I haven't spoken to him since the announcement came out. He was the best man at my wedding, and he had a battle with cancer 10 years ago, and he licked it, and it was fine. And he hadn't been feeling well. He got pneumonia last year, and talking to Lauren, his wonderful wife, just said, that he never fully recovered from that, and he just wasn't feeling well. And 9 different doctors with 9 different opinions, and she was, at odds. And I said, well, Lauren, you and Tony visited Janine so much in the hospital. You knew what I went through. I think it's time you go stew on these guys and demand an answer. 9 different doctors with 9 different opinions. It's time that you had him fully x-rayed and had him checked out, and just don't take no for an answer. Start out nice like I did and get aggressive. And then the next I heard, they announced it. And I had called there the week before they announced it, and she said, it's not a good time right now, I'll call you back. And she didn't call back. And so I think one of the reasons they went public with it was to stop the tabloids and places like TMZ from exploiting it.
Yeah.
Because, once the news comes out, there's not a lot that they can do, or not as much damage as they can do. Now, I have been reluctant to call him since she rushed me off the phone. I figured she would call me when the time was right. But Janine said, let's send them a card and just a friendship card and say, we're thinking about you and we miss you and all that. And I said, well, that's a good idea. So she went and got a card. And down at the bottom, I said, Lauren, I don't want to call at an inopportune time, so please call me when you have a moment. And I left it at that. Now, one of my mutual friends on Facebook posted something the other day, said, I went to see Tony. I visited him. We live about 100 miles from them now. We don't live in the LA area anymore, so it's a little harder for us to get there. And like I said, I don't want to be too pushy. But he went and visited Tony, and he said he was in good spirits and he was all smiles, and that's about all he said. So I can't give you an update on his health at this point. All I know is that they finally got him diagnosed, and let's hope that they're giving him the proper treatments to, pump him full of stuff that he will have a good quality of life and he'll be with us for a long, long time. Let's just hope that.
Yeah, I agree. We do got to kind of slowly wind this down, but I did want to hit on this before we go, that you're working on currently. It looks like a couple of box set DVDs for co-produced Shout Factory.
No, those were done in the last 10 years. I supervised the Leave It to Beaver box set, and I did Dennis the Menace and Dobie Gillis for them. They've been out for a while. They're great people over there at Shout Factory. They get it. They're collectors, and they're into classic TV like we are. And they gave me a lot of creative autonomy over there, and they pay pretty well too. So I'm particularly proud of the Dennis the Menace set because I did we tried to get Jay North, but he lives across the country and the timing wasn't good. But we were able to get Jeannie Russell and Gloria Henry, and the 3 of us sat and chatted about the show. That's a bonus video on the first volume of Dennis the Menace. It runs about 45 minutes. And I got so immersed in that conversation with them. It sounds stupid and silly, but I totally forgot we were in a studio and we were shooting this around a crew. And we got interrupted about 40 minutes in by the producer who said, Stu, I'm sorry, we have to interrupt you. We've got to change tapes. And I went, oh, that's right. We're shooting this. But I said, well, is it okay? And the guy's like, this is awesome. This is awesome. So they gave me a lot of creative control over there. They like I said, the pay was really good. They're great people to work with. And, I really enjoy working on projects like this because I feel they're done right that way, and we're giving the fans what they want. So, but in answer to your question, I'm semi-retired right now. I still have my video transfer business. I'm working on a job for a client right now, and I do my own show every other week. I cut back from once a week a few years ago because it was getting to be too much. So right now I'm doing the show every other week. As a matter of fact, I'm shooting a show tomorrow with CJ and Mallory. We're doing our own interview of what we did the last couple of years here.
Oh, well, that's great. Well, listen, I got to wind this down, and your film is called Stu's Show, and give out your website.
The website is StuShow.com. The film and the show have the same name, Stu Show, STUSSHOW.com, And I've got some shows you can watch for free on demand. All the archives are there. I've done over 600 shows, 500 audio, and 115 television shows to date. And if you love classic TV, you'll find a lot of great conversations with a lot of people that we've lost, like Jonathan Winters and my goodness, I'm looking at my wall here to get to Bill Daly from the Bob Newhart Show and I Dream of Jeannie, and a lot of the great game show hosts. I've had Bob Barker on the show. I've had Wink Martindale, Tom Kennedy, Jack Nars. If you're into classic TV, regardless of whether it's comedy, drama, or game shows, even animation, June Foray and Janet Waldo, voice actors, from the classic days, are all on there. So that's the place to go to be entertained if you're into this sort of stuff.
Bob Barker's still with us, isn't he?
Yeah, he's going to be 98 this year.
Wow.
I had him on the show when he was 92, and he was sharp as a tack. I did a whole show on him with him on Truth or Consequences, because you can see interviews about Price is Right with him everywhere, but I grew up on Truth or Consequences, and that was the first show I worked on as a kid, the last year that he hosted the show. And it was great to be with him again. I felt like I was 17 years old, and he was a wonderful guest. He's an amazing talent, and he still had it at 92 when I had him on the show.
Well, Stu, thanks so much for coming on. This was a lot of fun.
Well, thank you. You're a great host, Douglas. I wish you continued success.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm going to check out that Amy Poehler. What is that called?
Lucy and Desi, A Love Story.
Lucy and Desi, Love Story. Okay, great. All right, Stu, take